Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Safer Communities Overview Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to thank you all for attending and for the officers for attending. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Welsh language. This council supports the use of Welsh language. We've not been asked to discuss or talk in Welsh language today, so we'll be using the English language. As you know, this meeting is webcast. Please use the microphones when you want to speak. Please make sure your phones are set to silent or off. If there's a fire drill, please follow the signs to exit the building. The attendance register is being circulated. Please sign. And are there any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Rose Seaborn.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? I'd like you to declare them now, members. Legal officer, is there any comments?
Thank you, Chair. I've had a look at the agenda. I'm not aware of any interest that need to be declared, but if members have any queries, then I'm happy to assist. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of March 2018. The minutes relate to the Public Space Protection Orders review of dog controls in Torfaen. Members, can you confirm that the minutes are accurate? No? Thank you. Action sheet, agenda item number 4, please. Chris, please update members on any actions.
Yes, Chair. The request for information was sent to the executive member, and I believe a response has been received and circulated to members. And the other action was that the recommendations be sent to the executive member. That was done, and I think we're still waiting for the response. Thanks.
Members, do you have any questions on the actions? No? Okay. Well, then we'll go on to the main item on the agenda, which is the civil parking enforcement. Just to remind members, the purpose of this report is to provide information to the committee on Headley Gwent Police's intention to withdraw from the enforcement of highway-based parking restrictions, to update committee on work undertaken to date by the council in considering the business case to take on civil enforcement powers, to seek committee views on the potential for the council to progress the work necessary to implement a civil parking enforcement scheme, and to seek views on the model that could be implemented. I'd like to welcome Steve Jarrett and Craig Williams to the meeting, and it's over to you to present the report and to answer any questions we have at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Thank you for the introduction there, Chair. I'll just talk a bit more briefly to the report. We're asking you as Scrutiny Committee to review the information contained within the report and offer any views that you may have on the council seeking to acquire civil parking enforcement powers and what type of model could be implemented as you suggested earlier. So just to pick up, the enforcement of highway-based restrictions, traffic orders, is carried out by Headley Gwent Police at the moment. Headley Gwent Police have indicated they want to cease carrying out this function, and they've got together with us as 5 Gwent local authorities to advise us of this. On the back of that, we've sort of carried out some work into what would be the consequences of them withdrawing and us looking to take over the powers. I will say the police have involved us fully. And they've always suggested they want to carry out a managed handover of these powers, so we're not left in a hiatus where there is no enforcement. That clearly can't be guaranteed, though. That would be police's decision, and if the council were to progress, there's obviously a timescale for that. So we'd like that to continue to be the case, but that would be subject to further discussion. So just running to the issues and findings, we as the 5 local authorities commissioned a consultant to have a look at the potential for civil parking enforcement within the Gwent area. As Gwent local authorities, we have a history of working together collaboratively anyway, so we looked at a number of options, both sort of individually based, which are referred to in the document as generally as the B models, and equally then we asked the consultant to look at fully collaborative sort of ventures, and they're covered off in generally described as the J models. We have powers under the Traffic Management Act to take on civil parking enforcement, but we have to make an application to Welsh Government to acquire those powers. There's a number of steps we need to go through We need to ensure that our traffic regulation orders are all correct and up to date, all the signs and lines out on the highway that mean those orders can be enforced appropriate, and we have to convince Welsh Government, or convince is the wrong word, advise Welsh Government of the processes we would have in place to be able to operate such a scheme. There are some advantages and disadvantages to these schemes. Clearly, as a highway authority, we have the powers to implement traffic regulation orders at the moment, but we're reliant on the police to implement them. That is sometimes difficult when the police have obviously differing priorities than us. So that can cause difficulties sometimes with things that we want to do compared to what they can actually police in terms of their priorities. So it would give that power back to us. Equally, there's disadvantages. There's financial risks within this. The modelling we've done to date suggests that the scheme would run at a deficit, so we would be, as a council, paying more than it costs us, that we received in income. Now, we can mitigate that risk if we are to proceed, but that risk still remains. Equally, there's reputational risks about an enforcement regime that the police operate at the moment changing to an enforcement regime that the council may operate, and not being seen as an appropriate enforcement regime through either not enough enforcement or too much enforcement. People have strong views on enforcement, as we know. So we have then detailed out the advantages and disadvantages of the various models. I must say at this point, I put the J options in there for completeness, as in these are what we looked at, but really what we're looking at as a council are more broadly the B options. There's a number of reasons why the J options aren't to be progressed. One of the options, for example, was one Gwent Authority taking on the responsibility and function for all the other Gwent authorities. Now, that's clearly a significant risk for any one Gwent authority that wanted to do that. They're all starting from the same point as us, as in taking on these powers, applying for the powers. So the risk of doing that for 5 authorities rather than just one is obviously significantly higher. So there wasn't any real appetite for any of the Gwent authorities to do that. But the B models are broadly the same as the J models, much as they're independent, and they can still operate in similar sort of ways, as in we still could utilise a local authority back office, for example, if that was wanted. So there's a couple of questions posed within the report. It's typically, should the council seek to acquire civil parking enforcement powers, and then around what model that the committee would like to see implemented if enforcement powers were indeed desirable from the committee. So with that, Chair, I take you to the scrutiny activity, which I outlined earlier, and open up to any questions from members, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, members. I'll kick off, if you don't mind. What impact will apply for civil parking enforcement powers on current resources? How are we going to...
Apologies, Chair, if I can beg your indulgence. I omitted to formally introduce Craig. Craig is the Principal Road Safety and Traffic Management Officer within the division, so deals with typically the parking queries, traffic regulation order queries, as well as the more general road safety function. Thank you. Sorry for that. Apologies, Craig. Just going back to your question, Chair. We haven't got the resources in place for this at the moment. Clearly, it's not a function we do at the moment, so we haven't got either the enforcement officers, nor have we got what would be required as the back office if we were to have our own back office. The finance models that we've looked at include staffing requirements, and then they end up in the financial projections, which show the deficit. So in terms of resources money-wise, we run, like I say, at a loss on the scheme. In terms of it doesn't necessarily break even. In terms of the additional resources we'd need, the model is based on somewhere around sort of 3 to 4 wardens. and they'd be the wardens who were going out, issuing the penalty charge notices, checking maintenance requirements, looking at order suspensions, things like that, and probably 2 to 3 in the back office. Now you'd need a parking manager to head up the scheme and who'll be dealing with the appeals, but also you'd need administrative function then for people to take the calls, deal with the complaints, deal with the penalty charge notice issue and things like that. That element referred to latterly then, much as you still need a parking manager, if you went to a combined back office, that element would be reduced if you used another back office. So that other back office could either be, as referred to in the report, Wales Penalty Parking Partnership, which is a collection of local authorities. We have had discussions with the South Wales Parking Group, which is RCT and Merthyr combined. Equally, it could be a firm that provides that function as a commercial venture.
So just sort of, so on models, sort of the base model B1, 2, 3, are they financially, is there a big difference in any of those, or are they all financially, sort of, are they all around the same ballpark figure? What I'm trying to extract is financially which would be the better option. There are other considerations, of course, but financially which would be the better?
The better option is for us to contract out the service completely, as in financial terms. The most expensive option is for us to keep everything in-house. And then the other options of, say, enforcement in-house, administration external, enforcement external, administration in-house, fit between those two extremes.
Thank you for that. Councillor Evans, I think you've indicated.
Yeah. What are we going to be responsible for exactly? Will we be expected to act as traffic wardens?
Broadly, and it's signs and lines broadly. So typically, anything is controlled by a sign or a line on the highway. So it'd be a double yellow line, your limited waiting, disabled parking bays, things like that. They will be what we would enforce as a civil parking enforcement authority. There's a slight addition to it in terms of if we applied for special enforcement authority status as well, we could enforce some restrictions that aren't covered by some offences, in inverted commas, that aren't covered by signs and lines, and that's typically around drop curbs and obstruction and double parking. Other parking violations, if I use that word, remain within the remit of the police, as would moving traffic violations. So, yeah, it's been simplified to me as in when I've had discussions of signs and lines, council, other violations, police.
I'm going back to money. It's always money. Where will the extra money, because all of those scenarios, there's a cost involved, so where are we going to get our money from within the department? Has that been budgeted for in the recent budgets, knowing that this potentially was happening, or, where are we are with, how are we finding this money?
It hasn't been budgeted for as yet because no decisions have been made on it as yet. I have a report drafted which will be going to council to include the deliberations of this committee for a future cabinet meeting, which will detail out the financial consequences. I've spoken to colleagues in finance, and the initial implementation costs would be met from general fund balances, but ongoing budgetary pressures could very well form, budgetary pressures for the department going forward. Yet to be determined, though, Councillor.
Councillor Mills, I think you've indicated.
Yeah, carrying on from that theme, when we set the budget for this year, we had lots of workshops and so forth, and as far as I remember, this wasn't included. So therefore, from what you're saying, the cost would have to be found from elsewhere, such as education, social services, or something. So we've got to tell the residents that we're going to have to do less education, spend less on social services, because we're going to spend more money on parking enforcement. Is that what you're actually saying?
No, I'm hopefully I'm not saying that. I think what there's two parts to it, I suppose. There's the initial setup costs, and then there's the ongoing revenue costs if the scheme, as projected, doesn't break even. So the initial costs are going to be covered by fund balances, which I understand to be reserves. So they're outside of sort of what has been budget set at the moment. If we are going, if a decision is made to implement, then I would imagine that these pressures would then form part of next year's budget settings, because it will be a new service that we're providing.
Councillor Waite, I think you've indicated the next question.
Might be a question better levelled at the police. I think Gwent Police have worked with us in this, so I would say that they've acted well with us compared to anecdotally evidence I've heard about other forces withdrawing the function. I can only surmise that Gwent Police are under significant budgetary pressures. They've got to look long and hard at what functions they're carrying out. This is a function maybe that they don't see as a higher priority as other functions they have to carry out, and they're probably also looking at the national picture about parking enforcement. Gwent Police is certainly the only authority in Wales to still carry out parking enforcement. All the other authorities, police services, have stopped the function, and local authorities have picked up that function. And similarly across nationally, there's a significant amount of local authorities carrying out this sort of parking enforcement regime as opposed to police services carrying it out. So, like I said, a question better levelled at them, but that is my supposition.
Could I just ask one question? What powers do these wardens have? Do they have the power to arrest people? Because if a warden goes out and people are parked on WL lines and we get some really stroppy people out there, what sort of powers do they have? Do they have any powers at all for arrest, or have they got to ring for assistance off the police?
It's the latter. They have powers to carry out the function of a civil parking enforcement officer, which would be issuing penalty charge notices, using your example there, Councillor. But one of the things that's been recommended in our discussions with the consultant from his experience of previous schemes is exactly as you say. It is a concern that wardens can, civil parking enforcement officers can be verbally abused or worse. So there needs to be a strong link with the police to ensure an appropriate level of protection should they come under threat, really. But they haven't got powers of arrest or anything like that. They're not police officers.
And Councillor Thomas, you've indicated.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Stephen, I'm not sure whether you're going to know the answer to this. Hopefully you can surmise again, if you don't. Do you know what savings will be made by the police in reducing this enforcement? And will 12 points precepts be reduced?
I'm afraid I couldn't even surmise that one. I don't know how much resource Gwent Police put towards enforcement at the moment. They've never indicated that to us. They don't, as far as I'm aware, they don't have dedicated traffic wardens anymore, but they will be picking up parking enforcement as part of their officers' normal duties, I guess. But we're not privy to that. I'm afraid the precept question is beyond me as well. I would suggest probably not, but that would only be for someone else in finance or Gwent Police to confirm, really.
Councillor Mills, you've indicated.
Yeah, you've already partially answered this, but you said some other local police authorities throughout Wales have changed. Do you know whether all police authorities are going to hand over this, or is it just Gwent?
The other 3 police forces in Wales have already handed over these responsibilities. Yeah, so it's only Gwent that remain carrying out this function.
Okay, thanks. The other question I was going to ask, you've indicated that your preference would be the B. Can you confirm which one your preference is, B1, 2 or 3, and why that is your preference?
apologies if there's any misunderstanding. I didn't want to say that my preference was the B models. They're the only options that are realistically available to us as the council, rather than any particular preference, because the J options require others' input, which we're not, no one is particularly got an appetite for. That is the purpose of this scrutiny, really. I mean, if we look at the advantages and disadvantages, I as an officer have given those. I think really, we'd be seeking a political steer on how these things were, how such a scheme, if it were to be implemented, would want to be seen. If I took it as financial, then contracting out everything would be ideal. But equally, if we took it as we want to maintain the most control, then keeping everything in house would be ideal. But that is something that we are looking for a steer from this committee.
And Councillor Thomas, I think you've indicated to come back in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, just quickly. I mean, earlier on, I'm pretty sure you said that you would prefer to see it outsourced, or you would be looking for it to be outsourced. If that is the case, the ticket money, what would happen with that?
Again, and if I've said I'd prefer to see it outsourced, please don't take that as what I meant. These are options. There's a number of ways of doing it. For example, Merthyr and RCT work together. RCT provides the service, the back office service. Merthyr pay RCT a sum of money per penalty charge notice issued. They then use that in terms of their budget to operate the scheme, RCT that is, and Merthyr get the fine income, whatever that fine income is, and then they use that to run their part of the service. So the ticket money comes back to the authority effectively, but it's how you use that fine money then, or penalty charge notice money, to operate the scheme. You either pay someone to do it if you wanted to use an outside back office or an outside enforcement agency, or the authority is, the money is retained within the authority and used to fund the scheme.
I think Councillor Mills, you were the next.
Thank you, Chair. I think the question I was going to ask has already been answered, so if you don't mind, I'll jump a bit. When will we see that there's a constant approach throughout the whole of Gwent, so that, as a resident, if somebody parks in Abergavenny, parks in Pontypool, or parks in Newport, the same rules apply? Because otherwise it's going to be residents are going to get very angry if different rules apply in different parts of Gwent. So I presume you've talked to other authorities. Do you know what their approach is going to be?
We've certainly had discussions with the authorities. It's difficult to say because each authority will be going through their own process of coming up with a scheme, should that authority want to progress a scheme of CP. There's going to be local factors, I dare say, that determine what scheme is ultimately approved. I think it would be difficult to say that there will be a consistent approach across Gwent, because if you assume, let's make the assumption that Gwent Police withdraw, 5 local authorities then start enforcing, it's going to be extremely difficult for those 5 authorities to have a consistent scheme, because not only of the different demands and ways they want to implement, there's significantly different areas across the authority as well. You think of Newport City Centre, for example, compared to somewhere in Abergavenny, fairly rural, then there might be a zero tolerance policy in Newport, whereas in a rural area of Monmouthshire, there might be a more, can't think of the word, but a more latitude given on someone, perhaps in transgression of an order. So I think it'll be the answer, I suppose, is it will be difficult to be a consistent scheme across the authority in terms of when you receive a penalty charge notice and when you don't. There's a number of variables.
But you understand, for our residents, that's going to cause total confusion and we're going to upset everybody by that approach.
I think all we could offer as the authority is that, you know, we would like to see a consistent approach in our authority. So, for example, you know, our authority is fairly consistent. So if we can offer a consistent policy to our residents and consistent regime to our residents when they leave the authority, as they do now. For example, if looking at the Gwent authorities, if a Caerphilly resident goes into Cardiff, then they're faced with what is a Gwent regime, a Gwent police regime, to going into a Cardiff council-controlled regime. So there's differences across boundaries, and they'll probably remain.
Councillor Evans, you've indicated.
Will enforcement be a proactive or a reactive service?
I think a bit of both, effectively. The financial model has been built on a certain level of penalty charge notices being issued, and that's not a significantly high level. That's talking about one notice per hour per warden, per deployed hour. So that is factored in, as it will be just a proactive service where wardens will patrol restrictions and issue notices as they see fit. I think if you've got enforcement, however you choose to have it, be it in-house, be it contracted out, as long as the contract is written appropriately, we could look to be reactive as well. You know, if we had the service, then I think we'd want to maintain some flexibility within it. So if, for example, we had a hotspot for whatever reason, we could direct our officers, our enforcement officers, towards there. If we had an event, we could look to use our officers to support that event. So I envisage a little bit of both.
And I suppose, mindful, if we take on that special enforcement authority that you mentioned, then there's a possibility of people that are obstructing drop curbs. There could be a very quick reaction to that if we have those special powers. Anyway, Councillor Mills, I think you've indicated next.
I think you explained what exactly is going to be enforced, but there's always this problem of, we've all done it, you want to get money out the ATM machine, so you stop for a minute, 2 minutes, but you stopped on double yellow lines. We've all done it. So how are you going to be consistent with the one who just parks because they want to go shopping and the one who's going to be there for 2 minutes? Is it, if you've broken the law, you will get a ticket? Is it that approach, or will there be a case of, well, you've only been there for a few minutes, so I'll give you a warning this time, but next time you'll get a fixed penalty?
I think that level of detail is yet to be determined. We've been looking at the very early stages, and I think we'd probably want to ensure that what we did is implement this scheme with as much support as we could get from citizens to Torfaen, and that would include educational input as well from us as the council. So it could be, if during the various discussions that will take place, if we do decide to implement as a council over the next couple of years, if a zero tolerance policy is really what is wanted, and as obviously members and officers could enforce, then that's what we'll look to implement. But equally, your point is valid, and I do believe there's been some government discussion about latitude on overstays in parking and in car parks when car parks are paid for and things like that. So I think there would have to be some reasoned recognition of, you wouldn't want to go down really hard and heavy on everyone. Equally, you'd need to ensure that the scheme was a success and people look to act in accordance with the traffic regulation orders that existed. Otherwise, there'd be little point in you doing it, and the business case is predicated on some income from penalty charge notices. So you wouldn't want to be letting everyone off, to put it that way.
And I'll pinch your question on this one now. You sort of started to explain it, but one of the main things to me is how we get this message across to our residents. And please don't say it'll be on the council website, because annoys everybody. So how are we going to get this message across? Because just putting it on the council website doesn't work.
Something like this for me would need, a proper, well thought out comms campaign over a number of weeks, possibly months, which would use all the tools at our disposal to get the message across. Certainly from talking to colleagues in RCT, they put a lot of effort into their education campaign, if you like, before civil parking enforcement went live there, and I'm involved leafleting, social media, probably cinema advertising. I know RCT do a lot of that, from going to the cinema in RCT. Equally, they will, perhaps some bus backs and things like that. So it's certainly, a big campaign would be needed to make sure that people were advised. It's not something we would, as a council, I would suggest want to do by stealth. It's something we'd want to do to ensure that people acted in accordance with the traffic regulation orders that exist on a highway, and weren't taken by surprise by changing enforcement regime, because that could very well be the case if we enforce less or more than the police currently enforce. But a thorough campaign is needed.
Coming on that point, just on a bit of a technical point really, where Steve referred to the traffic regulation orders and the level of enforcement. I mean, it would be our intention to enforce those exactly the same as the police are able to enforce them under the powers now. But a good example would maybe double yellow lines. You are able to load and unload persons and goods on a double yellow line, but the enforcement officer would have to be confident that that person or that motorist was undertaking that activity. If, for whatever reason, they give them a ticket and don't believe they was undertaking that activity or didn't observe them doing so, then it would be up to the motorist to appeal, the same as they were able to appeal to the police now or challenge that particular issue with that ticket. So I think there's already exemptions within the traffic regulation orders that allow motorists to do certain things, but if they contravened those restrictions and any of the exemptions within those traffic regulation orders, then obviously our officers can issue a ticket. So a bit of a technical point, but it does allow certain things. People who display a disabled badge, blue disabled badge, for example, can park up for a certain number of hours, providing they're not causing an obstruction. So those exemptions exist, and I would assume that that's how we would instruct our enforcement officers to go about their business too.
I can only really reinforce what Ray said in communication here of this needs to be the best that it's ever been, because we are a year or two down the line of the current enforcement team, and every week you hear of another story of somebody getting a ticket that didn't know that that was taking place. They blame poor signage. There are lots of accusations, and I think for something as important as this and the reputational damage that this could cause to the authority, we need to go above and beyond. And if that means big coloured banners on every bridge and it just needs to be over and above and excessive to a degree, talking to community groups, doing all of the traditional things that we do and then some, because I'm really concerned that communication is not going to get across. We've lost Torfaen Talks, the newspaper, although some people still used it in the bottom of a budgie cage apparently, but that was for things of this importance, it was a good tool, because it hit every doorstep. That's gone, and not everybody in the authority is on social media or has internet access. If they're not seeing this stuff out and about or in their clubs and groups and seeing banners and signs, how are they going to find out? And for me, that's the really important thing. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Absolutely agree with you. In terms of us taking over the powers, yeah, certainly we want to ensure that everybody is aware that these powers are being taken over. I suppose the distinction to draw is that it's not new powers. We're not doing anything particularly differently than what people should be doing already. People shouldn't be parking on WL lines at the moment. Then they shouldn't be parking on WL lines after. But I fully appreciate your point. If we're going to be doing something different to what is happening, we need full engagement. And however we can get to the most people we possibly can, I'd certainly be very keen on a I know from talking to colleagues in RCT who've done it fairly recently, they saw that as one of the cornerstones of, they see a successful implementation of civil parking enforcement.
We had this discussion yesterday, some of us, and although the police have had the powers, they've not had traffic wardens for 8-10 years. So we currently have a situation where practically no enforcement takes place from the police in Torfaen. We are going to go to a place where we are now, the local authority might be taking that enforcement power on. So even though the powers were in place with the police, they've not been enforced for many a year. And now the council might be taking up that gauntlet. And it's the reputational damage. And more importantly, people knowing that they are going to get a ticket after 10 years of parking on that yellow line outside their house, knowing that that is going to happen so they can change behaviour to avoid that ticket. That's the really important step for me. I'll go on to my question. The enforcement. I mean, I know with the current enforcement for litter, etc., up until very recently, that enforcement could take place on both private and publicly owned land. Where are we with this?
As far as I'm aware with this looks at highway-based restrictions. So we'd be concentrating our efforts on highways. I'm not sure that we've got the powers to go on to third-party land. Don't believe we have. That is something that we'll, once we get further into the scheme, we'd look at. But at the moment, all we've looked at, for example, in terms of building the model, is our highways restrictions, what they are, how long they would take to patrol, that sort of thing. So we certainly haven't considered any third-party land outside of the highway, basically.
And earlier on, you sort of gave us a bit of a list of what signs and lines, and then this special. Where are we in publicly owned car parks? A number of us discussed this yesterday. Abandoned cars, caravans that are parked and taken up, and maybe dumped there. Where are we with those sort of things in this?
We've got traffic regulation orders on some car parks at the moment. Excuse me. And obviously our car parks are free, so it's not about overstaying. It's not about overstaying what you've paid for. There is some scope for overstaying in the short stay, and we can enforce against that. We can enforce in the car parks against people not parking in the bay, and there's some behavioural issues as well that we can enforce against in the traffic regulation order. And I know on top of that there's the public spaces protection order that applies to some of the car parks where other behaviours can be enforced. In terms of caravans and other abandoned cars, it doesn't really fall into this element of the policy. That would be, unless it's an abandoned car on a WL line, in which case we could ticket it. But if it's abandoned, realistically, that's not going to make a huge amount of difference, because it's about vehicles parking, which would be in use, if you know what I mean, rather than abandoned vehicles.
Thanks for that. Councillor Jones, I think you've indicated next.
Hi, both. What are the costs associated with forming a back office as set out in 710B1?
I'm not going to be able to provide that information now, because the model is quite complex, and I haven't extracted that information for that particular question, but I can certainly provide that to the committee, if you like. Yeah.
Yes, please. Great. Could I just have a supplement to that? It sounds like it would make sense for all the authorities around this area to work together. Would that make savings for us?
I think the working collaboratively would realise some savings. It also realise some efficiencies, some resilience. If, for example, one Gwent authority enforced for all and running the administration for all, I think the difficulties that every authority has got is the risk associated with doing that, which is why we've looked at and included options there for back offices with other local authorities. I'm aware that the other local authorities in Gwent are also looking at that sort of option, so they're looking to mitigate their risks in terms of setting up a completely new regime. I don't think that's particularly unusual in terms of that method of operation. If you think the Wales Penalty Parking Partnership, I believe, has got something like 11 local authorities in it. So they all carry out their enforcement in different ways, but they carry out their back office functions with someone else that's already set that function up, so that the risks are reduced. It's certainly why we looked at the J options, but they sort of gradually ruled themselves out, really.
Thank you.
Councillor Waite?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of concerns, to be honest with you, about this. I've had issues within my ward and about people double parking and on double and people are actually ringing me and saying, "Oh, this thing double parking. What are you going to do?" And I said, and I've always said it to pass, well, that is a police matter, and you should be reporting it to the police. You know, I will be angry with numbers, you know, and I've been given numbers and what have you. But it seems now we're taking on a bigger risk again, because people are just going to expect us to be the police, not the actual policemen. I mean, and a lot of the people, they haven't got the I can say they haven't got the strength to, or they don't want to report anything because they don't want to know my name. I don't, you know, but I can do it, and you know, and that's really concerning me. I think it's going to put a lot more pressure on us as councillors than what we really need, to be quite honest with you, because that's what people will do. They'll ring the councillor and they'll ask the councillor to ring the warden's department, and I think if we're going to make these people aware of where they have to ring and how they got to contact them, because at the moment they just don't know. They think that we do everything, and when the police never respond to me, I get enough names called anyway. You know, I'd say, well, listen, there's nothing more I can do. I've reported it to the police. I've left messages. They haven't got back to me. But I'm still parking. You know it. And I think this is just bringing extra pressure on us.
Thing again. It's definitely down to communication of the scheme.
Absolutely.
My concern is, because I sit on the fire authority, how are we going to manage if people are double parking and emergency services need to get through to these particular fires or incidents, and because they operate on a 24-hour system. So if somebody's parking late in the evening, will they be able to get hold of somebody to deal with the parking regarding the safety of residents with emergency services?
You know, it won't be a 24/7 service that we provide, but equally the police will still retain powers for certain violations, and I would suggest, you know, preventing access for an emergency service vehicle would probably be one of those things. So the police will still have powers to act. What we take effectively is the signs and lines element. The police still retain powers. I'll go back to my RCT colleagues' description: signs and lines, council, everything else, police, and that's the general broad split. So the police should still be able to act in that regard.
Councillor Mills?
Me again. One of the things you've indicated, one of the options is to contract this out. If we do go down that road, how long do you envisage the contract to be for? Because if we're not happy with it, would we, you know, we've got to be in a position to say we're not happy with this, we want to stop it. So would it be for a year, 2 years, or what?
I would envisage it'd be a reasonable length of time, because if you are contracting out, you're asking someone to take on staff. So I don't think a contract for a year, if you wanted to do that, would be attractive to the market particularly. They would probably want, you know, some certainty, at least maybe 3 to 5 years. And then it would be about the monitoring of that contract then, and ensuring that the contract was written in such a way that we could get what we wanted. But bear in mind that, you know, if we did contract out and we wrote a very onerous contract, that would cost us more money than a simpler contract, if you like.
Have you been in contact with? You say you've talked to Rhondda Condon Taff a lot on this. Have you got examples of their contracts and what they've accepted, so that we don't invent the wheel again and again? So we're looking at what the other authorities that have already gone down this road, what the contracts they've got, so we can sort of cherry pick?
I haven't at the moment because RCT don't contract out. RCT employ their own enforcement officers, and they now run the back office function on behalf of them and Merthyr. Previously, Merthyr ran it on behalf of RCT. As far as I'm aware, that's broadly the picture across Wales. There's some shared enforcement. I believe Bridgend and the Vale operate shared enforcement, but then I believe that they use the Wales Penalty Parking Processing Partnership for the back office function. I think the contracting out is probably more prevalent in England, in some of the authorities there, and I haven't had any discussions about contracting out, but should that be the way that the council wanted to go, that would be one of the things I would do. Yeah, I fully appreciate your point that we don't, we don't want to start from scratch on inventing something. Hence discussions with RTT, for example.
Sir Thomas?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just so I'm clear now, I've got to clear my mind. The authorities that you've spoken to that are already running this, they do it themselves, or it's a shared enforcement? That's what you're saying. The ones you have spoken to, either they're doing it or it's shared, yeah?
Yes, that's right, yeah. Like I say, a variation of sharing either back office or enforcement functions, but typically it broadly remains within the public sector, to put it that way, if you like. There doesn't seem to be any particular appetite for contracting out, as in getting an outside commercial company to operate.
Thank you. In 7.11 in the agenda, this is about the given the commitment made to pilots and alternatives to the contracted environmental enforcement, Cabinet members requested that consideration be given to a holistic joint enforcement service. So what is their preference? Because that holistic joined up enforcement service could mean a couple of those. Have they given an indication of Cabinet's preference? Not as though it would influence us, but it would be good to know if it's in that report.
I don't know their exact views, other than I know there is a view that if we have civil parking enforcement officers, could they carry out other functions related to litter, dog fouling, for example? Now, nobody seems to do that, which I think the paragraph goes on to say. Nobody at the moment seems to operate such a system. There is that potential to lead. I think what we've got to be careful of is that we don't dilute, or we don't try and do too much at once, firstly. So we don't try and employ civil parking enforcement officers and give them a number of other functions to do as well. And also we need to bear in mind that the civil parking enforcement officers, the business case for it has been built on a certain level of penalty charge notice issuing. So if that doesn't happen because they're tasked to do other things, then that income won't be coming in, and then the deficit grows larger. These are all political decisions, but within the report there's certainly a commitment that, much as it doesn't happen, we could indeed lead the way and look at multi sort of function enforcement, both enforcement officers for litter doing civil parking enforcement and vice versa.
And we had that very discussion, a few of us yesterday, in that it seems to make sense really that now knowing that potentially it could be 3 to 4 officers doing this, and only one Kingdom officer doing, it sort of makes sense to some of us that those functions become joined up somehow, because it would save money in the long run. And it seems that if we're not going, if the choice of Cabinet or exec member is to contract out the service, we'd have 2 separate contracts. If we're having one in-house and still retaining litter and dog fouling, it just, I know that we had a discussion about it yesterday and on that very subject, and so it seems that Cabinet have had that very same discussions too, which is really, I'm pleased to hear that. On to Councillor Evans.
How do you plan to carry out enforcement around schools and safe routes to schools on the route?
Again, probably beyond where we are at the moment in terms of level of detail, but we are certainly aware from our roles in traffic management that congestion around schools is a big concern, and indeed, if safe routes to schools are being blocked by parked vehicles, that's another cause of concern. This obviously gives us a bit more scope to direct operations to where we want, and tied in with other work we do in terms of things like Walk to School Week and other interventions in road safety education. We could certainly look at making a bigger impact if we had enforcement officers at our disposal.
Thank you. We're now on to Councillor Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That's a good one. There has long been a suspicion amongst drivers that parking charges and penalties are being treated as backdoor taxation by local authorities. How will you actively manage, resolve, minimise these negative impacts?
I think it goes back to the communications campaign to start off with, in terms of what we've been trying to do as a highway authority. Our restrictions we've got out there. We want people to comply with the TROs that are on the ground. You're right. There is a perception that, and we've all seen parking wars where the thought is that the officer hid behind a tree and waited till someone went. But I mean, that isn't the way we intend to operate. And I mean, at the moment, our business planning, of our financial modelling, is showing that the scheme isn't going to break even anyway, so it's not going to make money, so it certainly couldn't be perceived as that by the public. If we do get an income from it, then that is ring-fenced to highway projects or highway-related schemes, highway transportation-related schemes. So if there is an income, then that goes back into the provision of the council services anyway. So hopefully we could allay those fears through the initial comms campaign and then ongoing education and advice.
Could there be potential conflicts in service delivery with other services, public bodies? How will you seek to avoid, manage and mitigate this?
Sorry, Councillor, I don't quite understand the question in terms of the conflict with the public services.
Delivery service bodies.
To be like
In the relation to the models, I think, yeah.
RSLs and everything in the project.
Yeah, because you've got scenarios where in this borough you have RSLs owning bits that they can, whether they can enforce or not, and bits of public land and bits of privately owned. And I think, is there a conflict there?
Apologies if I didn't quite understand the question. I don't believe so, because as we were discussing earlier, we're looking to enforce on highway and in our car parks. So there'd be pretty much clarity on what we were looking to do. So I can't see any particular conflict.
Councillor Evans.
Sorry, can I just add to that? Yeah, the business case as well, with a number of officers, is based on the sort of length of restrictions and the type of restrictions we've already got within the borough, and those are applied to only the public highway and the car parks where we've got car parking orders. So none of those areas have been investigated or factored into the business case. So you can take that as some reassurance that it's all the restrictions is on the public highway as we have them now, and the car parks.
Yeah, I think that's why we sought clarity earlier on whether it was private and public, because it wasn't completely clear, hence the question on, Councillor.
Yeah, certainly I would envisage so. I mean, we performance manage most of our functions So this would set up a new system of performance management and also accountability. Going back to, I think, Councillor Thomas's point about not being perceived as a money-making scheme that could assist in getting our message across. So yes, really answer, yeah.
Yeah, Councillor Knowles?
Yeah, just so that you know, one of the things we looked at were the Facebook comments. Besides all the rude comments about the Wrekin roundabout, the public aren't particularly enamoured with this idea. One of the things I was interested to find out is, how do you intend to consult with ward members so that we have the ability to identify hotspots? The same as we do at the moment with the street cleansing system. We have quarterly meetings to identify area within our wards. Do you envisage the same thing happening?
The quarterly meetings model for street scene seems to have been an effective one. So yeah, we could very well look to do something like that, certainly in the early periods of the scheme being set up. And it's also a way of us transferring information from members to us, and from us as officers to members. But I wouldn't want to restrict it to quarterly things. You know, if all of a sudden you had a hotspot that never had been for whatever reason and came up then, and we did indeed have those powers, a caveat in there all the time, then you could contact the authority and we'd look to respond to it, either to carry out some routes in that area, or to advise members of why we wouldn't, and have that dialogue, certainly.
Sorry, you won't come on. So you, from what you're saying, is the system we have at the moment where we email Linda Ash and she's excellent, she gets back to us straight away, we would be able to use that system?
Yes. Sorry, yes, certainly, this would be another service that the council operated. So if there were any concerns with the service or any queries on the service, then the communications would be in the normal way. Suffice to say that, similarly, the quarterly street scene model, which was set up purposely to discuss how the new model was operating, there could very well be that sort of added layer of interaction as well.
I'm going to talk money again. Earlier on in the meeting, you mentioned that part of, if this is chosen to go ahead, that you use the word in how to make sure our highways are ready. Are we? I possibly think we're not. And if not, how are we going to fund that, and how soon is it going to be done?
I agree with you that we're not. Part and parcel of making the application to Welsh Government is ensuring that the order and the lines and signs to support that order are correct. So that is factored in with the original set-up costs. So when we were talking about set-up costs earlier, and that being secured from general fund balances, that's been factored into that. In terms of how long it would take to do, a number of months at the very soonest, I would suggest. You literally need to inspect the lines and signs, and then instruct any works necessary to ensure those lines and signs conform with the order and enable the order to be enforceable.
That in itself is a massive piece of work for you to undertake. Anyway, Councillor Evans, I think you were on the last.
Have you undertaken any analysis on the particular issues within the borough? And if so, what are they?
We haven't looked at anything specific. We've looked at what the orders are there at the moment and how we would need to enforce the orders. I think Craig mentioned earlier the orders have been looked at, patrols and numbers of hours deployed based on what orders we've got and how often we would look to marshal those orders. So as part of this work, we haven't looked at any particular hotspots to say, actually, we need another officer purely to look at schools, for example. But those lines will have been factored into the overall assessment of numbers of hours, numbers of staff needed for enforcement. I mean, we will be aware, and Craig will be closer to it than I, of what areas we have concerns with across the authority, and as mentioned by members, typically schools will factor highly in there, where where people are parking on zigzags. There'll be areas of core network which we will struggle with, where people will park. So it's those sorts of things, corners denying access to tight residential streets. So we're aware of, the headlines of the problems, if you like, and probably Craig and myself between us could reel off a few of them. But
it's the geography of the area as well, isn't it? That's where we tend to sort of get concentrated complaints. Valley streets and towns. That's the areas where we have the problems of parking at junctions, limited frontages on properties. So, we've got 2 and 3 car families. The streets quickly filled up on one side or both. So, as Steve said, we and just from members' inquiries and customer inquiries themselves, we could probably get an idea of the areas where we have the most sort of issues. But we haven't done that sort of analysis.
But just to say, this is based on existing restrictions that we've got there. So the restrictions we know about, that's what we've based the financial model on, and that's what the assessment's been undertaken on.
I mean, this is going to be such a fine line. You've got some streets in the borough that, particularly sort of your rows of terraces, that have the facility for 1 car outside, and yet there are 2, 3, 4 cars. There are no other options for them to park. But if they are, the risk for them to continually be having parking tickets, there's going to be an absolute fine line to balance here, because if there is nowhere else for them to park, then it's a whole bigger problem then.
Can I just come in on that, Yeah, I mean, we often get requests for the application of new parking restrictions, particularly in residential areas, on all junctions, for one side of the road or both, and I guess that's what our response is, in that, you could apply extensive lengths of parking restrictions, but there are little or no alternative parking areas, and all you tend to do is displace that parking to other areas, causing the same or worse problem. Now, arguably, if people are more aware that enforcement could be undertaken, then that could have a similar impact. So, that is an implication, if you like, of having a more stringent enforcement regime, that people who may be illegally parking now, or willing to take the risk then that they're parking either illegally or obstructively, may no longer take that risk and park elsewhere. So, that is a big consideration of having a more stringent enforcement regime in place.
Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just going back really to what you were saying about it being a fine line of how we do this. I mean, an excellent place for making money would be schools. So we need to make sure that we probably don't send officers down to schools, because we'll be seen as not very good for doing such a thing. So I just wanted to make sure that's mentioned and put across.
Councillor Jones.
I was just going to ask, going back to getting ready, do you think some of our residents would appreciate it if we looked at some places where we could make more parking spaces, or is that too expensive and not in your gift?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. It doesn't form part of these considerations, and we have no funding for provision of off-street parking at the moment. So it's not something that we could offer.
It's a terrible pity.
Councillor Wade.
Yes, about school parking, I know outside Westmont School, up in my ward there, from about 10 to 3 till 20 past 3, it's just manic. Everyone parks, and it's all double yellow lines. Should we be thinking of putting limits, for because I've spoken to the police, and the police say we don't want to book anybody because we're so unpopular. So is there any sort of flexibility going to be in with this parking, particularly outside schools? But saying that, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, it's all gone, and everything's fine. But really, they are parking on double yellow lanes, and it is an offence. So perhaps we got to start looking at a bit of flexibility or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would go back to communications again. Equally, I appreciate people are only there for a short length of time, but equally the concerns we get levelled at us is, my children are walking through lines and lines of parked cars. So there's an argument to be lenient, but I suppose there's also an argument that after you've tried education and leniency, there might be an argument for tickets. And I do believe that's kind of the police's approach. They will ticket habitual offenders. They will try education first, but they will ticket habitual offenders if they think they're getting nowhere. Anecdotally, that is. But these are the sorts of conundrums we have to consider, yeah.
And maybe part of the communication that we do could be an officer at schools for those designated times, giving out flyers and fly posting cars that are doing it, so that they have all been told that this time next week you will get a ticket if you do this. And to be that harsh maybe in that they've all had, every parent of the school has had a leaflet, everybody that's outside the school has had one from an officer of one sort or another, so that there's no grounds for accusation then. Councillor Jones?
Earlier on you said you ruled out all the J options, is that right? Can I just ask why?
That was based on the J options generally need all the authorities to work together and take on particular functions in some of the J options. For example, I think you used the example of one Gwent authority running all park enforcement services and all back office functions. No authority was particularly wanted or had the appetite for that, given the risks involved of doing it firstly only for themselves, but equally then for another 4 authorities. The potential risks are just too big, really. I suppose what I can assure the committee of is that we do work collaboratively with the councils. We have done so to try and investigate these options, and if we can get efficiencies and resilience from working with our neighbours, we'll continue to investigate those opportunities, really.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Horler.
During the consultation education period, whatever you want to call it, are there plans for any public forums, perhaps involving the police, fire service, ambulance service, where the public could actually be involved in planning going forward to have their own input?
Like I say, a bit in advance of where we are at the moment, but certainly happy to hear any suggestions from the committee in how we can effectively engage. We'll have our own methods, but equally grateful to hear any other forums. The Fire Authority one from Council earlier was useful. It's that sort of thing that we can need to pick up. So engagement with other public forums be useful. And we do try, for things like this, we do try and tag on to things like, for example, in terms of bus concerns, public transport concerns, I've gone to older people's forums and things like that. So looking to utilise anything that's out there would be useful for us.
You have an awful lot of community events happening now, and Pontypool Park, Cumbrae Party Park, there's an awful lot of them planned, and I suggest that you have a stall at each of those, because the one that I help organise in particular, we have quite a lot of people through the gates from the local area, and it would be a good tool for you to get involved in at that level, because people are actually looking at the stalls and what's going on, and it would be a good face-to-face for all of them. There's the Cumbrae one, there's Pontypool, there's everything going on in Blenavon, and that would be a really good exercise in communicating.
I think this year is too early. The police have still got the powers. We won't have the powers for some significant time yet, but certainly next year. And depending when the implementation date, if the implementation date gets set, then we can work backwards from that and see which ones will be useful to hit. We do, in terms of other functions, we attend some of those events anyway. So we could add parking to them.
Are there any other questions, members? No, I'd very much like to, with Ray that mentioned about Facebook, this did go onto Facebook, and it did generate an awful lot of comments. Sadly, most of them were about the weekend roundabout. But there are sort of, well, there are 3 that I'd like to read out, that's out of the probably 45 that were left. The first one, Danielle Cameron. Yes, parking should be enforced, but not by private companies working for the council. Also, most yellow lines do not meet the requirements of the Highway Code, and this should be taken into consideration, as parking on a broken double yellow line is legal and can't be enforced. What happened to the traffic wardens? Then there was pages over. All of those were about weekend. Mike Thomas, let the council have parking wardens and crack down on the completely blocking footpaths before a child, pensioner or disabled person gets wiped out. Not sure what the PCSOs will do though, perhaps. Okay. I don't want to read the last line. And then there's another one over on the back, Mel, about time something was done about the misuse of blue badge and people using disabled bays without a blue badge, which I think is very relevant to the perhaps looking into adopting those extra powers. Yeah. Anyway, any other comments on the Facebook? No? Then I'd like to thank the public for participating in that. Oh, Councillor Thomas.
Just on the Facebook one, I'm sure Craig should know this one. So Daniel Cameron said that parking on a broken double yellow line is legal. Is that right? A broken double yellow line. It's legal, yes?
Depends.
Yeah, it depends. It would have to be considered if someone challenged the ticket. Whether the line is broken or not would be subject to looking into that. If it was obvious that was a line, you tried to challenge the ticket on a technicality potentially, so it wouldn't be. I couldn't say either way. It would have to be subject to an appeal process.
Yeah. Just in case I end up doing it, see, I know what I'm doing.
Well, I'd like to thank those that participated in the Facebook chat. Sadly, most of it was about the Wrekin roundabout, but that's a whole other issue that's taken over Torvine's Facebook at the moment, I think. Thank you, officers, for attending. I don't expect you to stay for the next bit. Members are going to sort of formulate our recommendations. I'm sure you've got much more work to do than sit and listen to us. But thank you very much for your time. So members, we've been asked as the scrutiny. Thank you. We've been asked as the scrutiny committee to consider when coming up with their recommendations. So the committee has been asked to review the information contained within the report, offer any views they may have on the principle of the council seeking to implement a civil parking enforcement scheme and the type of model that could be implemented. So now we need to have a discussion on any of the recommendations. But I suppose the first question should be are we going to recommend that we proceed with a civil parking enforcement scheme?
Well, I don't think we have an option, do we?
No.
Yeah, but in reality, if we don't take it over, there'll be absolute mayhem throughout the whole of Torvine parking.
It's pretty much a free-for-all now because we've had no traffic wardens for 10 or 15 years. So this will be a big change for people that live in the borough because they've had a free-for-all for a long while. So what I'm hearing is that, yes, we should be looking at some model of civil parking, yeah?
I think mainly because whatever ward you represent, parking is one of the major issues residents contact us about. So at least we will be seen to do something about it.
I think we got a bit of a hornet's nest because we're damned if we don't do anything and we're damned if we are.
Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. The same as Councillor Mills has said. We've got no choice. We've got to do something, and I think going on the model that we need to choose, recommend. I think it needs to be the same as the other authorities have done, and go in house, or at least look at it being shared. I think there's no other way of doing it really. That seems to be the preferred one from what I was getting from other authorities.
Are we all sort of agreement in that sort of model? Yeah. Councillor Jones?
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. I think that it would be great if we could share, because then people can't just blame Torfaen for everything, can they? And we could also share that advertising to get it out to all the general public, which, you know, your suggestion was great on that, because we need it advertised everywhere so people understand.
I think the models that we are only able to choose from at the moment are the B models, and that doesn't involve working with other. And I think, reading between the lines, I think very much because it's the entire Gwent, all of the local authorities within the former Gwent are all going down this process themselves now. So I think it's very early days for them to be discussing merging I think they'll all probably want to try and do their own thing to see how it works before they then move on. So I do agree with you. Moving in the future at some point, I think it would be great for them for the model to and possibly align with any future remodelling of council boundaries. Again, that's a whole. So what I am hearing then is that we are looking to recommend either completely in-house enforcement and back office functions, or like RCT and is it Caerphilly or Merthyr said, is enforcement in-house, administrative.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they do administrative. One authority does it for the other. So what are your thoughts on where we should go with that?
I mean, for me, I mean, I like I said, ideally, I would like to see it totally in-house myself. You know, I just think we got more control that way. That's my own personal view on it, but I think that's just the best way forward for control.
Councillor Jones?
I just see this as so dangerous for the council to take on in many ways, because I think this is such a contentious issue. Like you say, we have to be very careful that everybody knows what's going to happen. But I do wonder if there's some form of sharing. If we did back office one year and another authority did it the next year and vice versa, that will spread some of the problems over more than just Torfaen.
I completely agree. I just think that at the moment all we've got on the table is Torfaen alone, and I think we've got to make our recommendation based on it not being shared, unfortunately. A year from now, 2 years from now, this could well come back to Council Cabinet's exec member for a decision on merging. And I would then support that, because I think financially it would stack up to do that. But unfortunately at the moment. So are we all in agreement in that we are out of the recommendations that are in front of us? So base B1, B2, B3. Are we all looking that we should bring the entire service, both enforcement and back office function, in-house? Councillor Hawler.
Do we know why Rhondda Cynn and Taff and the others have decided to outsource the back room? I mean, they're bound to have had good reasons to do it.
They haven't outsourced to a separate company. They've outsourced to each other over a period. So the one outsourced the back office function to the other authority 1 year, and then it changed the following year. So they are doing each other's back office function for over a period of yeah.
And that option isn't available to us.
No.
Chair, could I just say I totally agree with you, and I think we should merge. If we can merge these other people, it'd be even better. I think we should be a little bit flexible, because if we see one authority has got something that's a good practice, that gives us the option to do what they are doing, or if like I said, if Monmouth are doing something different to us and is successful, then let's be flexible enough to be able to sit down and
I completely agree. However, it's not in the options. To work with another authority at the moment isn't an option. It's based B1, B2, B3 on page 22 is the only model. Councillor Jones.
Could we make a recommendation then that we are looking at other authorities the whole time and looking at best practice and taking it on board where we can? I
think one of the things that I picked up that I would like to see if you would agree. They mentioned, other than signs and lines, they also mentioned this special enforcement that they can apply for as well, which would allow enforcement over drop curbs, disabled badges, obstruction. For me, they are some of the biggest complaints. So can we include the recommendation that we also apply for that special enforcement?
And what about taxi ranks? That's the one I didn't ask.
I didn't ask, and he didn't say, so yeah. So we're basically the model that we're recommending. Yes, we want to proceed. Our recommendation is to proceed with this. That we want it all in house, but to look at other authorities and look to merge them at some future date. The special enforcement be applied for. And where are we on? Zero tolerance was mentioned. Is there a recommendation that we can put forward for that?
Well, I think we have to. Otherwise, there's going to be inconsistencies within different areas, and also motorists won't know where they stand. Because if it's a double yellow line, you're not allowed to park on it no matter what time, whether there's an ATM there or not. Yeah. So therefore, once you start saying, well, we'll let you off this time, or you can stay there for a couple of minutes, he did explain about if somebody is trying to load or unload, that's fair enough. But if you're just parking your car there because you can't be bothered to find a car park, that's against the law, and that should be implemented throughout the borough.
So moving on from that, maybe the one of the big recommendations should be that it's communication. Communication has to be exceptional, and then the recommendation is once that communication has been and should be over and above, that we recommend some, that it's to make it fair, that there's a zero tolerance.
Can I just say that, yes, that's right. And if we were to be lenient outside schools or to ignore them, or where there's an ambulance that wants to get through and we have a death, our council are going to be in such a terrible position, so we've got to be so careful.
Which is why I made the suggestion of the officers actually attending the schools, because if every parent that's dropping off or is given a flyer with, this time next week you could be ticketed for doing what you've done today, then it needs to be as simple as that, in my opinion.
And not just that, Chair. I mean, with the schools, I mean, the schools themselves can send letters home to the parents and explain that the council is now taken over, and you could well be ticketed if you're parking illegally outside the school. So the schools could take have a bit of involvement in this as well, I think.
And the traditional, the website, the Facebook, the Twitter, community groups, pensioner complexes, for want of a better description, all of those schools. I mean, I
suggest, that you're better off if they have some big signs on roundabouts where everybody passes to go where they're going, particularly.
And on some of the bridges is what I suggested some of those enforcement starts in Torvine on such and such a date, and parking enforcement, or so that it's high profile and in people's faces. Even in supermarkets, go and do some road shows in supermarkets.
The cinema idea was a good one as well. That he said that RCT was doing.
Isn't it?
Yeah, but if it's there, you could do it. Yeah.
I'm going to say, because the RSLs have ways of communicating with their residents, so we could get them on.
Yeah.
What about yourselves? But normally I have issues regarding the RSLs with parking, but it's very difficult to get any response.
It isn't just the RSLs, it's the council vehicles as well, who have problems with parking.
But I'm the ward with a lot of RSL properties. It's difficult to try and get any response regarding the RSL land.
Sorry, the other thing, I know we've gone for that preferred option, but if the option is to contract out, he did sort of do away immediately with the idea of combining the contracts.
That was the joined up.
Yeah, that's what I cannot see the problem with that. If you're giving a ticket to a motorist and you see a resident dropping litter, why can't you? You're there rather than have three different people. You have one company that enforces everything, and therefore you're going to get consistency across the board. You're going to get it's going to be cheaper because you've got one guy doing dog fouling, littering, and parking. So I cannot see what the problem. Okay, it's going to be a change in job descriptions and everything else, but that can be a way forward.
Well, first as last, if they're having to do the contracts for enforcement, in-house enforcement, and they do not include litter and dog fouling, etc. in that contract, 6 months or a year down the line, they're going to have to renew the contract and redo them. It might as well be first as last. Another recommendation, I did write it on my list, join up parking and dog fouling, littering enforcement in one, because there is a move for a strong recommendation for that facility to come in-house. It just seems that now would be the appropriate time to do that whilst they're working on all of those. I can't see it being a major difficulty. And the other thing that I'd like to add as a recommendation is that members are heavily consulted on their areas and their hotspots, so that, and in fact, consulted on the scheme itself, because we're just a few of the members here, and I think that all members would like some sort of say in this and where we go with it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, if you talk about job descriptions, you just put it under the Torvine enforcement officer, which would cover it all. Exactly. Surely, you know, your dog fouling, your littering, and the car parking. I mean, it's a three-way simple solution, isn't it?
You're talking about, can we recommend that we have a seminar on this so that all members can actually put their thoughts to it?
So I think we've had a nice roundup of recommendations there for the officers. I captured some of them, and I know Leanne has captured the others. So thank you very much for attending, everybody. This is the last meeting of this municipal year. Hopefully we'll all be here for the next one. I've really enjoyed my year as chair, and I think we've had some really meaty topics, and I think we've actually sort of influenced some changes. So I think that it's been a positive committee, and I'd like to thank you all for that and the input. Hopefully we'll all be here next time, and I now close the meeting. Thank you.